Welcome back to Saltwater Podcast, bringing you the best in poetry, spoken word, arts and culture. Featuring some heavy hitters in the world of art and social change, Saltwater Podcast aims to emulate the intimate conversation that happens within friends while introducing its audience to a cohort of vibrant talent. Featuring new episodes every 2 weeks and hosted by me, Lindsay Price, we are delighted to bring you some of the most exciting artists in the Northwest and beyond. This podcast was launched purely from a crowdfunder, so I mean it from the bottom of my heart when I say we have you, the audience, to thank. Today I sat down with Gerry Clarkson. We go deep into Gerry's writing process, his experience growing up, his current delve into playwriting, and what he learned about masculinity from being a single parent to 2 girls. This conversation felt really important, and I think you'll agree that the words between us just flow. Be sure to let us know what you think. Thank you for being here for this episode, and enjoy. This episode is brought to you by Maria & Craig's, a distilled non-alcoholic CBD botanical spirit. Maria & Craig's combine premium CBD with natural hemp, distilled juniper, sage, chamomile and orange blossom, resulting in a fresh and bittersweet botanical blend best enjoyed mixed with a premium tonic or in a cocktail, very much like your favourite gin. We all lead busy, sometimes stressful lives, and for many of us, having a drink with friends at the end of the day is a welcome treat. With Maria & Craig's, you can have just that, but without alcohol and with the added benefits of CBD. Maria & Craig's won't intoxicate you, but it will help you unwind after a busy day, and it is delicious too. To get 15% off your purchase, head over to maria-and-craigs.com and use the code SALT15 at checkout. That's SALT15. Valid until the 3rd of May. Be sure to tag us in any pictures of drinks and cocktails you make and let us know what you think. Hi, welcome back to Saltwater Podcast, bringing you the best in spoken word, poetry, arts and culture. I am on my 2nd interview of the day, just powering through. And I want to welcome you, one of the people who I was most excited to have on this podcast, which is the wonderful Gerry Clarkson.
Flattered, thank you, Lindsay.
Hey, welcome, how are you?
I'm good. Pleasure to be here, be part of it.
We're so happy to have you. So a little bit of context on Gerry. He is a graduate in international journalism and a recent recipient of the Everyman Theatre Back-to-Back's Writers' Award. Gerry actually started performing poetry at the ripe old age of 50, and since debuting on Liverpool's poetry scene 5 years ago, Gerry is now a regular performer and has been given a guest poet at numerous events across the Northwest. Gerry, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Lindsay.
So we're going to hear all about you in a minute, but we were hoping you could maybe kick us off with a poem to start off with.
Yeah, brilliant. I'll give you a little bit of context behind the poem. It's called Internal Letter, and I think it sits in with the theme of a lot of my poems. It's just a journey through into yourself. And we all hit hard times, and when we hit them hard times, often the answers we need are internal. So again, internal letter. Straining, draining, the pain of a billion neurological pulses have my brain in overload. Headaches are growing, fuses are blowing, anger's showing, memories scream while the hopes that streamed are tangled, mangled, burnt out wires, the faint dull sparks of far and distant dreams. And the breaking fast, synapse lapse, reroute that circuit or this system will collapse. AC/DC, yes or no, the tension's electric, which way do I go? Too late, oh no. Lights are fading, shutting down from overload to a darkness void of any sound. But in that dark, where gremlins try to pull apart the connections that link us to our head and heart, there remains a faint dull spark. It's an ancestral light that with an adjustment of sight we can reignite and help to burn bright, and it can force those demons to take flight, and it can enlighten the mind. Now it may take some time, but it can help unwind those jumbled, mumbled, mixed up lines. It's that instinctive, intuitive and inner voice that when tuned right helps us get wisdom to choice. And then connections can be found, earthed on solid ground. And when all the ghosts in the machine have been exercised, it's time to plug back in and go back online. And then it's time for all systems to go live. Switches click, reboot kicks, memories flicker. But these snapshots of the past are no longer clogged up lines filled with wrath, but now offer us a calmer, clearer and more focused path. Thank you.
Gerry, that was beautiful.
I'm glad you liked it.
Wow.
It was very much a personal poem, and I was very sort of nervous to share it at first because I'm obviously exposing, you know, in any art form, you've got to expose a bit of self.
Yeah.
And I knew I was doing that there. But since I've done it, it's actually really become one of my favourite poems.
Yeah.
I really do enjoy performing it.
Do you feel like the payoff is quite great when you do take the risk and share something that's a bit more vulnerable?
Look, I go back to my very first performance, I was terrified. But as soon as I stepped down, Linz, I wanted to get back up. And I was just so keen to do it again.
Yeah.
You know, that the reward I got from it, as you said, the payoff, it was so sort of rewarding that I wanted more of it.
Honestly,
Yeah.
like I say that anyone who's performing for the first time and is nervous or doesn't want to, I always say like it'll never be as scary as the first time. And after that it's always scary, but it's that first one.
Yeah.
After that, different.
Well, I always say to people, do it. Because believe me, once you finish, you'll question why you never done it sooner.
Yeah.
You'll want to come back and do it more. You
Completely.
know? Yeah. And I think that's what's really nice about it is one of the most beautiful things I think about performing is when you get that response from the audience and you're talking about your most personal experiences and the emotions you've gone through, and yet people understand you and get you. And that to me is the best connection you get through poetry, is that emotional sort of connection with other people,
Yeah.
strangers from so many different backgrounds who you might not think you had anything in common with, and then suddenly one poem and you're sort of like best friends forever, your emotional sort of comrades.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was reading about like, I think it was like the word catharsis was originally like a Greek word, and it was what they applied to theatre and like poetry, because it was like sharing for a brief moment
Yeah.
what it's like to be human to
Yeah.
another human. That's the thing that builds empathy, and poetry like lends itself so well to doing that.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the one thing I've said since doing poetry, I've realised it's how we share something emotionally and we make that connection, we empathise with other human beings on an emotional level, and that doesn't matter whether we come from a background of different race, class, gender, sexuality, culture, religion. Them emotions are universal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we were saying that before, weren't we? Like emotion really is a universal theme,
Yeah.
completely. Gerry, tell us a little bit about like sometimes I know artists get a bit frustrated at being asked like how they got started, but for me, I actually find it really interesting. And like with it being 5 years ago, like how did you get started? What led you down the path to picking up the pen for the first time?
Well, the pen was picked up so many years before. I come from a big family and I was the youngest of 5. And so my only sort of private space was going to bed early and having that private space to myself then. And I used to read. And from that sort of ideas I had, I started putting them down on paper. And I then knew I wanted to be a writer. But what medium of writing, whether it was... So I went and done my degree in journalism. And then when I come out of university, I was a single parent, 2 daughters at home. And like any parent, you'll have another parent there to sound off the struggles of the day, what went right, what went wrong. And I didn't have anyone else to share that with. So the paper become my sort of, my friend. And I started putting my ideas, my thoughts down on paper, and I started to want to write it in a more concise, I think the right word to use is, in a way that sort of captured the emotion as well as the reality of my journey. And so then I started looking at thinking, oh, that makes a lovely poem. But it was also a really nice cathartic way of putting things down that were in my mind, in my sort of thinking, and I was worried about. And I'd put it down in a succinct way where it becomes something that become a sort of and really nice, nourished soundbite of everything I was thinking in a really sort of concise way. And they basically developed into poems. And so that's what got me writing poetry.
Yeah.
But performance was another journey again on itself, because I'd reached that age where I'd coming up to my 50th birthday. And it was just the idea of, it's something I want to do now, I want to share it. I was terrified. But I just thought, sod it, what have I got to lose? I'm 50 now. If I don't do it now, I'll never do it. And there's an old saying, a niner, as someone who's reaching sort of 29, 39 or 49, there's evidence to show that they make changes in their lives. And it's as we reach that decade, we're reaching this point in our lives where we're coming to a sort of clearly defined point, and it makes us question what have we done with the years before, and then makes us ask questions, what are we going to do with the years ahead of us?
Yes.
And that's what it was, just reaching my 50th birthday, and I thought, I just want to go out and do it.
I love that so much, and like I can really relate to that from turning 30. Like I'm 31 now. My whole life completely switched, and like I really did like grow up a lot in those years, and maybe not even purposely, just situational things happen to me. But it really is a pivotal time, approaching a milestone in life. Yeah,
and it's like a shift in who you are emotionally as well, as much as not the physical growth, that emotional growth in you. You realise you're coming to another point in your life. And you're not the child or the teenager or the young adult anymore. You're now this person. And then that forces, to me, it forced a growth, a sort of a stop, a reassessment, and then a change in what I decided to do with my life.
I love that. And I love what you said about writing first and foremost for yourself. Like the way I categorize my poetry to people is like, I just write for myself. And it's just it's a coincidence, a happy accident that it turns out and it's a poem and it's decent enough to share with people. But I would always have that tool, even if I never shared it, because it's my form of working stuff out in my head.
Yeah, it's your release. And I think, as you say, writing for yourself, what's really important there is, if you can be honest with yourself, then the audience will see that. And they will see what you're saying is authentic. It's not said because it's a popular opinion. It's said because it's a personal opinion, and you're sharing that with your audience. And in that way, like any relationship, it's built on honest communication.
Yeah.
You're sharing the honest feelings from inside, and that's where you get that relationship with the audience.
What was like your first ever poem that you performed out loud? Like, can you remember?
Yes. It was Gorilla Lips.
Okay. Yeah.
And it was a poem as I was sitting down at home writing for myself. The name Gorilla Lips comes from a name I was given as a child growing up from my peers on the council estate. And it was derogatory. Often it was said with friendliness as well. You know, it wasn't always like an attack on me, but it became my nickname. But also what it did do, it made me question myself about, you know, my own confidence. Like, do I look like a monkey? And I went into myself for a lot of years. But then one day I come up with the idea of changing the word gorilla from the ape, spelled G-O-R, to the small arms fighter.
Yes.
Now, when I looked at that in the dictionary, it was defined as doing something without the need of permission or authority. Now, I'd always been shy, but now I'd realised Gorilla Lips is the voice allowed to speak without the need of permission or authority.
It's almost like you granting yourself your own permission.
Yes,
you know, like, well, I've given myself it, so.
And I'd give myself that, and I actually use it now and refer back to it. Like, if I'm writing a line that I think, ooh, I don't know how that'll go down with someone, the opening poem to the Gorilla Lips poem is, with Gorilla Lips, I'll create controversy. And so if what I'm going to say is going to be a little bit controversial, and I then edit myself to not say it, then I'm not being true to that original line. And so that's an original line that I always refer back to, and it keeps me sort of focused on what my purpose is, why I'm writing this.
Yeah.
I'm saying things that, okay, they may not have always been discussed by everyone, but I think they're an important topic to be discussed. So I'm going to put it out there, and hopefully create an environment where now we can discuss that because it's been said once. And again, that's a lovely thing about poetry.
And that's like permitting other people into the conversation as well. So not only granting that to yourself, but opening the door up for others of like, okay, well, you're in this now. What do you think? Like,
and a lot of people love the story, but those, like, someone questioned me, isn't that racist because a gorilla is a derogatory term to a black person? And my response to that was, well, that's only because you associate gorillas with black people, so maybe that's an internal racism that you need to challenge in yourself, you know? And It's
That's
not attacking
bias.
anyone,
That's
yeah. And I'm not attacking anyone for that, because I'll always have the conversation and I'm not personally offended. It's someone else's perspective, someone else's journey, and they're allowed that. However, the fact that we're having that conversation is what's important.
Yeah.
And it stemmed from a poem that initiated it.
Well, and again, a poem and a title like that generated a conversation or
Yeah.
disrupted the conversation
Yeah.
in a way that caused people to take a minute. So actually, the name's done exactly what it needs
Yeah.
because it's initiated people into a conversation on race. So
Well,
that's
it's done
helpful.
many things, Linz, as you said. It gave me permission to speak.
Yeah.
You know, but it's also give others permission to speak. And it's, if anything, it's give my voice value. Not for anyone else to validate my voice, but I now feel it's got value and it's something I'm willing to share with the world.
Yeah.
Where before I started coming out to do the poetry, these were things that were left in cupboards, you know, hidden from everyone. And now I'm sharing it all with the world.
I've seen your flag as well. It's like a backdrop you have, don't
Yeah.
you? With like your like the brand on it.
Yeah.
And I feel like even seeing that behind you, if you do
Yeah.
something online, it adds like a certain power to what
Yeah.
you're saying. Like it gives you confidence because your surroundings are like reflecting your thoughts.
Yeah, and there was something lovely about that. Now, just before I started doing poetry, I lost my mum and dad in the same year, and it was a tough time. But my dad was always outspoken, and he had a real bite in his voice. And yet my mum was always very sort of calm and peaceful. And so that image, it's a picture of a gorilla with its open mouth with aggression, wearing a helmet with a peace sign on it. So the mouth represents me dad, but the helmet represents me mum,
Yeah.
the protector.
And it's like needing both to communicate really well. And actually, I think strength and the softness are something I can hear in your voice anyway. Like I was going to say earlier, right after you shared your poem, like I could listen to you talk for forever because there's just such... but we only have an hour, no, but like there's such a lovely vocal quality to the way that you speak, the way that your voice sounds, and I wonder whether that influence of having a strong person versus a soft person made that.
I think they made me who I am, in the sense of I've got the strength to say what I feel, but do it in a gentle way, that I'm not attacking or sort of in an aggressive sort of shout at someone, but I am going to say something that may not always get agreement from the audience. But the fact that I'll say it, and I think the audience picks up, he's not attacking us for being something that he disagrees with. He's trying to show us that there's alternatives there.
Yeah.
Someone said it to me. He said, you seem to sort of recognise the struggles of being human in the modern world. But what you always do is remind us that we are human, and so we're fallible and we're not perfect. And to me, that was a lovely quote to sort of describe me, that I remind you that you're human and it's okay to be, not perfect.
Yeah. To be flawed and complex and be a person with like, you contain multitudes, lots of different aspects of yourself. I think that reminder is so important. And like you said about that kind of quiet confidence, like a quiet strength, like I really resonate with that. Like, like I'm tiny and I go on stage, but people are like, wow. And it's like, again, I'm not the loudest person at the party or the most flamboyant or the most whatever, but there's something about speaking your truth in such a direct way, and I've been in the room when you've performed and people are silent, people are drawn in.
It is one of them things. Well, as I said, I come from a working class background, from what would be labelled an ethnic minority, for want of a better term. However, one of the things as well with doing poetry is I didn't want to be pigeonholed as like this urban poet who's got full of angst. Don't get me wrong, I can do poems full of angst all day long, but I can also do poems that sort of show a gentler side. And it was important to me to not be pigeonholed into one type of poet. As I said, I do a poem about stars, and I say, if Wordsworth can write about clouds, then I can write about stars.
Yeah.
And whatever label you want to put on me, can you just remember, I'm a poet first. Whatever other sort of link you connect that to, whether it's an urban poet, a black poet, no, I'm a poet.
I really like resonate with that, and I think we had Felix Mufti on earlier, and we were just speaking about this idea of authenticity within poetry. And Felix says like he doesn't write about being trans, for example, all the time because there's other interesting things going on. And I understand like why you might feel the pressure to write from like the perspective of a black man, but there's so many elements to your personality that, and again, it's like giving yourself permission to show up fully as you.
Like, I was talking to you, and we talked about, I do that poem about masculinity, to be a man. Now, that was actually written for the fact that I was a single parent with daughters, and I had to check myself and my masculine attitudes towards women.
Yeah.
Because I knew my daughters were going to grow into them women who were going to face men with that attitude. And I had to set an example to them. And that was part of the influence of writing that poem, is talking about the pressures we face as men in a patriarchal society to live up to this strong, we don't show feelings. And one of the lovely things with that poem is I think so many men really enjoy it. It's like, wow, you're saying something that we've all wanted to say, but the pressures of the world around us doesn't always allow us to say it, or puts us in a position where we fear saying it.
Yeah.
And so it's being able to have that dialogue. And again, that's another lovely aspect about poetry, is I can talk about any side of my journey and emotion on an emotional level and share it with the world, but also show it that it's part of a human experience rather than, it's not me as a black male or a working class male, it's me as a human being.
And you're not claiming to have all the answers as well, which are like, I'm just going to explore this topic in front of people to an audience, and you tell me, you make up your own decisions as well. Like, it's not like you're claiming to know everything.
I put a couple of devices in, like there's poems, like in that man poem, there's a line in it where they say, this is just my opinion. I can only apply my definition of being a man to self. I'm not here to force it onto anybody else. And that was my little, okay, this is my position. However, some people may disagree with it, and that's okay, because I'm only taking one person's opinion. This isn't like a consensus of how we should all live. This is just one personal perspective. And that's if someone wants to challenge and disagree with what I'm saying, it's okay, you can. And that's what that little device is in there for, to let them know that it's only one opinion. There's other opinions out there. And I'm open to hear all them as equally.
I wanted to ask you actually, like, on the note of that poem that you wrote and exploring masculinity within yourself and the wider world, like how, obviously it was like triggered by like having daughters, but what did that process actually look like for you? Like, how did you challenge that within yourself? Like, what were you reading or experiencing?
No, I mean, it was a lot to do with the actual hands-on role of being a single parent to daughters. Now, one of the things that come out of that was I had to resolve their challenges, help them resolve their challenges. So I had to be a lot more patient. I had to be a lot more attentive and listening. And even if what I heard sort of made me feel uncomfortable, I had to accept it. Like, daughters, they're going to grow up into women. They're going to become sexually active. I didn't want to hear that.
No.
I didn't want to hear that at all. However, the reality is, it's going to happen.
It's happening whether you like it or not, really.
So what can I do? And one of the things I said, I'm a biased father. My daughters are beautiful. However, the concern with that was, well, that's going to get male attention. Now, I can't change the way they look and that attention coming to them. However, I can influence how they think and how they respond to that. And so that was, again, part of me. It's things I hadn't considered until I'd become a single parent, about these are young women growing up. And I have to give them the strength to be themselves. And I think my oldest daughter asked me once, why do boys get a cool reputation for sleeping around when girls get a bad reputation? And my response, and I was terrified, and how do I respond to that 15-year-old girl? I don't want to give her permission to go out carte blanche and sleep with boys. But, if that's what she's at in life, it's going to happen. So my response was that it's normal to become sexually active at a certain point in your life. The only concern I'd have is that you do it because it's the right thing for you, and don't ever do it to please anybody else. And I left it at that and walked away, and then sat there and questioned a million questions to have said the right thing. But In reflection, I think I did say what needed to be said. I didn't want them to have, a good, healthy relationship would mean that they'd have a healthy sex life. So again, that had to be something I had to accept and make sure that they were comfortable within themselves.
I love it so much. And just the fact that you are questioning your approach as a parent in approach to the fact, like, the responsibility of bringing two women into the world and then,
exactly.
helping molding them.
Yeah.
And I think just the fact that you are taking the time to think about what that means already tells me that you're doing a great job because of the fact that you've got that self-awareness.
I think I've got to the point now where I've realised I must have done something right, because I'm writing a poem called Daughter Dad, and it's just about all the things I had to do to raise daughters and all the things I had to give. But slowly through that poem, I'm trying to explain that, how much I got from that and they gave me, right?
Yeah.
To the point where they become my daughter sisters, where the young adults who I can sound off to, they will support me. But as I'm getting older, I've started to realise, Lynn's, they're turning into me daughter mothers.
Oh, God.
Starting to tell me off when I do things
full
wrong.
circle.
Yeah, it's come full circle on me.
Wow.
And that's, the theme of the poem that I'm writing at the moment, But again, it's through that journey and that experience that now I can write about these things with authenticity. Yeah. It's not me looking as a fly on the wall in a situation. It's coming from a real first-hand personal experience.
And I think that really is a testament to good parenting, the fact that they're actually of value to you and they're offering you wisdom or support or insight that you haven't thought of. That's like they've surpassed your support, which is great.
Yeah. And it's lovely. I mean, I got a lovely line for the poem. Is it okay if I share this line?
Of course, yeah.
I would describe parenting: wielding the ultimate power of an absolute ruler with the love and compassion of the most devout servant. So that's my summary of being a parent. Because I had all this power and I could tell them what to do. I could boss them around. Yeah. I'm bigger, I'm stronger. But my objective is to serve their well-being.
Honestly, like, I think... because I worked with children for like a really long time and all ages, but mainly like 0 to 3s and then 4 to 8s. And I just realised at a certain point, I'm not in charge here. Yeah. I'm not in charge. I know nothing. Because firstly, like, if you don't know, like, my knowledge of dinosaurs, for example, is not great. I've been like mocked and scorned by children who are like, "You're an idiot. You don't even know what a triceratops is." And it's like, wow, I went to uni. I've got a degree, but I'm an idiot in this child's eyes. Like, I know it makes sense, but resounding that control, I think, being like, okay.
And I think one of the things I learned as a parent, like any children play up and they test boundaries, and I was losing it. I was getting frustrated. I was starting to raise my voice. And then I started to realise, okay, I'm in my mid-30s and this child's 7, yet they're pushing my buttons. Yeah. I've lost control here. And again, it forced me to check myself, calm myself down and look at it in a more rational approach rather than all my fears ruling it. You know, if their well-being started ruling my thinking rather than my concerns or what made my life easier. Would often be. And then I realised it's not about whether I make my life easier, it's whether I make their life structured enough to give them the platform to grow and take on the world.
It's the hardest job alive, I think, honestly.
But again, as I said, and I think that informs my poetry today, not just in poems that I write about the children, but the fact that I've had to step back and sort of see things from that broader perspective. I think I've adopted that into so many other aspects of my life, whether that be with my friends. I'm more calm, I sit back and offer the alternative perspective rather than just join in and agree with everybody. But again, that is that experience that I went through as being a parent.
You strike me as someone who is quite hard to fluster or to anger, and I don't know. We all have it.
Can be.
Yeah, I was going to say.
But then I've had my moments where, I don't keep me cool, But I think I've learned to manage my emotions a lot more. And again, back to poetry. When I first started doing the poetry on the poetry scene, I had a lot of angsty poems. But what I found is that through poetry, I've been able to release that angst. It's been an outlet for me, and so that again has allowed me to step back and see the calmer side of me And then that's influenced other poems that maybe while I was angst-filled, I would never have been in that emotional space.
It's almost the irony of like doing it for like an emotional release, but then that emotion is no longer there.
Yeah.
So you're like, I'm not even writing these angsty poems I'm known for because
yeah.
I've got no more anger in me.
Yeah. It's that thing, isn't it? That I need someone to hurt me so I can write a poem. You know, I've been there because I haven't got them angst anymore. However, there is them things that do sort of frustrate me with the world we live in. You know, we see homophobia, racism, sexism, and they do still frustrate me. And there is moments where I do have that, I'm going to write about that. And I think I'd done a poem during the lockdown in response to the George Floyd murder. And again, it was angst-fueled. But what it's nice is I now have a channel for it.
100%.
Yeah, it's not something that sort of builds in me and I become this angsty person. I recognise it, I write about it, and then I release it.
I was literally talking about this with someone, a friend of mine the other day, because I've recently gone through like some challenges in my personal life, like deep challenges, and exiting a relationship and all sorts of things. And everyone has said like, you're doing loads of creative things at the moment and you've set a podcast up and you're doing this stuff. And I'm like, oh, it's rage. Rage has fueled me. I'm just a tiny ball of rage. But it found the right outlet and then we've made beautiful things of it rather than sitting and letting it eat you alive.
And this is the thing I found about poetry is we all have them moments in life. It's normal. However, how we allow that, whether it becomes a destructive thing or a productive thing, and having poetry, and I think it's like a lot of art forms, it allows you to express it in a more constructive way because it can be self-destructive.
And I think real rage is like a real powerful resource if tapped into correctly. That's how changes happen. That's how social change happens. That's how movements are led. But again, knowing and balancing it out and knowing when to not let it take you on like a rabbit hole. And
see, I've said it about poetry. It's often therapy. And I hear it with some poets when I'm listening to them. And I'm sure they pick it up the same on me. So it's not a criticism. But it's part of our therapeutic process. One thing I've learned is that my emotions are valid. However, how I express them and respond to them is up to me.
100%.
And that is where it can slip to being destructive or productive.
Anyone in this world, everyone has the right to feel triggered.
Yeah.
It's a human response. It's part of life. It's going to happen. But we all have even though we can't control what triggers us, we can't control our outside circumstances, we can control how we react.
Yeah. Or we should learn to control.
Over time.
Yeah. And again, that's through experience. And often it's through getting it wrong.
Yeah,
you know, again, we've all made mistakes in this world. That's where when someone said about you recognise the challenges of life, but you remind you that you're human. It's that, we've all made mistakes in life. And it's not the mistakes we made, it's the learning we take from it. That's important, you know.
I wanted to ask, actually, so you recently won the Everyman Back-to-Back Writers Award. So tell us a little bit about that and what it is that you're working on, if you can.
Yeah. Well, the Writers Award, I seen it advertised and I was like, should I apply for it? Am I qualified to apply for it? And I've said this a couple of times, it's a bit of an imposter syndrome where I'm questioning, am I a poet, am I a writer? But by doing, I am. Yeah. So I put in the application and I didn't expect a lot from it. And then obviously I was awarded the Back-to-Back Award. Which was lovely. It was a real confidence booster, you know, that someone recognises something that you're questioning yourself. So it's an outside validation. And so I've sat down with staff from the Everyman, Francesca in particular, and just discussed ideas for writing. And so this has took me writing now to a different place where I'm looking at sort of an idea for a play. Hopefully it'll develop into something that I can talk more about in the future. But I want to do something that shows a journey, a personal journey. So it's part autobiographical, but obviously with a lot of artistic license. And through the journey, I'm going to hopefully use poems to express the emotion of the journey that the character's going through in the play. But again, it's something that's in the sort of... It's in the development stages at the moment, shall we say. So hopefully I'll have more to say about that in the next few weeks, months.
No, it's great, and it's such a journey anyway.
Yeah.
I love like you saying about like, am I a poet? But like, let's like use grammar correctly. Let's use words. You are.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, I've worked with people before or run workshops, and people are like, oh, I'm not a poet, and I'm like, if you're writing poetry and doing poems on stage, you're not a cyclist.
Yeah,
You're
yeah,
not a baker.
yeah.
You're a poet.
Yeah,
Like that's what it is.
yeah.
And I really want to encourage people to remove those labels. Calling yourself a poet doesn't mean you have to have been published and you have to have reached a certain level. It's like by writing poetry, I must be a poet.
And
You
if
must
I mean, I'm sure there's a million people out there who've got collections of poems that they've written at home and never shared with anyone. Right? So to the public, they're not involved in poetry or art, but accepting yourself that you are a poet.
Yeah,
You know,
coming out to yourself as a poet, really.
And again, it's that admission to self. As I said, the imposter syndrome. I'd said to you before, I'm trying to write a play, and then I realised I've got to stop saying trying and say, I'm writing a play.
You are writing a play, you know, whether it's at a level that you like or it's good in your mind right now, but you're writing one.
And the lovely thing is, this is 5 years this month since I first went on Liverpool's poetry scene and done the very first performance poem of my life. And so it feels like I've done 5 years doing poetry, and now I've reached this point where I'm moving on to I'm taking it further. And the writing's still there, the poetry's still there, but it's developing.
Yeah.
And it seems like 5 years of that has now brought me to this point where I'm now sort of going on a bit of a new journey with it.
It's so beautiful to see as well. And, you know, from watching you 5 years ago when you first were performing and coming to nights I was running at the time, is so I love seeing people's journeys. And, you know, I think you've reached a point where you're very confident in your work, and now taking on playwriting is a completely different genre. But it's like, I feel like if that was emerging, you're at a stage now where you have, I know that you can never fully arrive, but you've emerged to some extent.
Yes.
You know, you've arrived at a voice that you're comfortable using.
I've reached that first staging post on the journey.
Yeah.
I've rested, and now I'm moving on to the next stage of the journey.
Next
That's how
milestone.
it feels to me. And it has been, it's that development, but that development's only come through going out there. Like, as I told you before, Lynn, first time I went and done a poetry performance, I was terrified of the microphone. Now I'm sitting in front of microphones and cameras with the lights on, and I'm just like, and yet there's still nerves there, you know, a question. But I think that's a healthy thing, because if I went in there thinking, I've done it for 5 years, so I'm going to do it for the next 5 years, it's automatic, I'd end up falling flat on my face.
I think nerves are helpful, and it's only like, we're getting better every single day, and by showing up you always will improve. But it's never not nerve-wracking to speak your truth in front of people, even if you've done it a million times. It's always a bit scary.
And as you said, when you know, you're a poet because you're concerned with grammar, you know, I now realise how pedantic I am about whether the comma should be in this place, should it be an apostrophe S, you know. And what's been lovely about joining getting involved in Liverpool's poetry scene is I've met so many really gorgeous people from so many different backgrounds who I would never have crossed paths with before. And I can have a conversation about a comma and we can discuss it for an hour. You know, it's that like sort of someone who gets my passion for words. And I'm in sort of people with a similar sort of outlook. So that's what's been really beautiful. It's like I've been accepted into a community.
There is something really beautiful about community, and I feel like finding your people. I think I've always felt like on the outskirts of life, but finding my people through poetry and being like, I'm so welcome here, I'm so accepted. I could walk into a poetry night anywhere across the country and not know a soul and be 100% confident, and someone's going to talk to me because we're poets and we've all got something to say.
That's what we do, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I've realised, like before I started doing the poetry, I was a civil servant at home, single parent, just working away. And now I can walk into sort of the Everyman Theatre. I could walk into sort of the Jacaranda, like when you used to do the rhymes and records. And there's a group of people, now they mightn't be my closest friends, but we have a common affinity with one another. and we associate, we gather, sort of gravitate to one another, and it's just really beautiful.
It feels like old and ritualistic as well, and I go on about this all the time, but I think since the dawn of time, humans were doing things like this. We were sharing in
Yeah.
circle, in communities, our knowledge and
Yeah.
experience and life and entertainment. And whenever people gather to hear words, I always just feel like it's going back to an
Yeah.
older way of doing things.
Well, isn't it the old oral traditions?
Yeah.
Before the written word, we'd share stories, and them stories would be the sort of moral guides to the community, talking about what's right and what's wrong, and the mistakes we made and the things we done well. And that, to me, is what we do today as performance poets. Is so sort of connected to a history of oral traditions.
Yeah.
Where we share and we teach each other about our journeys, and we help each other through.
It's being an oracle, and like I say this all the time, like before the written word there was the spoken word. We speak about
exactly.
ancient texts being
Yeah.
full of knowledge, but like before they existed, you know, it was years before
Yeah.
people were writing, like, so we were speaking those
And one of the
words.
things I love about the oral tradition is it changes to the circumstances, to the context of the new audience. So, say the written word can be fixed, and it can then be, you know, we've seen it with fixed text, it can create conflict, people misinterpreting it and having different perspectives on it. Where I read something, poets don't say anything new, just say the same things in a new way. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what was said 100 years ago, we're saying it again, but we're making it more accessible to today's audience through our words that we use today, the vernacular of the modern, rather than saying it in the old ways. So we're saying things that are been said before, but we're bringing them alive again, you know? And that's what I think is lovely about the spoken word, is I'm speaking to an audience in 2022. So the language you use, the analogies, the metaphors you use will be relevant to that audience.
Yeah.
You know, I won't, if I talk about sort of transport, I won't be talking about horses and carriages. I'll be talking about cars, because that's the world we live in.
It's like it's rooted in context because you can't create work in a vacuum.
Yeah.
You're influenced by your surroundings. I was going to ask you, like, who inspires you? Like, who do you get inspiration from?
See, as I said, when I was younger, I used to read a lot, and I really love it when I'm reading a book and someone says something that's just so gorgeous and sums up everything you want to hear in such a really concise, succinct way, using really beautiful language. However, when it comes to poetry, I was more into me rap.
Okay.
Yeah. And it was sort of, I grew up in the 80s, so as rap was coming to the fore, and it was Public Enemy. But then before that, it was Gil Scott-Heron. And then before that, it was the likes,
Love
I've done,
Gil
did you hear
Scott-Heron.
the Last Poets?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
New York 1960s. So they were the type of things, and they was very much social commentary. And I think that's what influenced my social commentary and my poems. And so they were my biggest influences. But then I think as well, when I've read novels, and it's not full of social commentary, but it is in a very subliminal way, and it's talking about the emotional journey. I love that side of writing as well. You know, and someone that can express themselves. Like, I think there was a book, it was The Kite Runner, and they're talking about someone coming out of trauma, and they describe it as watching the first snowflakes of spring melting. It didn't tell you summer was here, but you knew it was on its way. We were on our way there, you know. And that, to me, the way they described it in the book, it was one of them pages where I had to go back.
It's like Goosebumps.
Yeah.
Just like
I had
that's
to
wow.
reread it again.
Yeah.
And then I read it again and I thought, nah, I'll read it another time. Because I knew what it was going to say, but I just really enjoyed how it was said. And maybe that's where this affinity to words, I love it when I see them put together well. Isn't it the old saying, poetry is the best choice of words put in the best order?
100%.
Yeah.
I really like that kind of like non-discrimination you have as well, of like, regardless of what it is. I'm quite similar to that. Like, I could read anything. It could be
Yeah.
the back of a cereal box if it's interesting
Yeah.
enough. It could be a magazine. It could be going to the theatre, but you can get inspiration everywhere. It's quite interesting as well. Like,
Well, I grew up, I'd done Black studies, and I read a lot of the Black American classics from the 1940s and 50s. One of my favourites was Langston Hughes, Black poet and writer. But then I decided not a few years back, I'm going to go and read some classics. So I read Wuthering Heights. What else did I read? Because there was Pride and Prejudice. Then I read some of the American classics like Great Gatsby, things like that. Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer. And so I tried to vary my reading because, I don't know, it was just that the journeys they were telling, I could read all the black classics, say from the 1940s and 50s, like Uncle Tom's Cabin, The Invisible Man, A Native Son. But also, they were talking about circumstances that were specific to a black experience. But then when I went and read other stories, like Wuthering Heights, it was more the broader human experience.
Yeah.
So, and as much as that black experience is important, it's also to help me to connect that to a human experience.
I think if you have a message as well, like I've said this loads of times to people, like if you've got a real strong political message you want to convey, if you've got a poetry set and it's got like space for 10 poems and you want to share something that's so Gerry and it's like, this is a little trait I have or a quirk or this like silly thing I do, and it gives everyone a real idea of who you are as a person, a human, then when you do a poem that's about oppression, that's about like the black community, that's about your struggles being a man or like whatever it is, it lands even deeper because we were already connected to you as a person, and it shouldn't take that, but it does. So I think people should lean into that sometimes.
I think what's lovely about that, as you're saying, is that you know me as a person, and then I'll give you a narrow view, if you want to, for want of a better word, or a small aspect of an experience as a man in a patriarchal society struggling to express himself, or as a black person growing up in a European sort of white-dominated society. But that's an aspect of the whole. It's not the whole, and that's, I think, is what's important. What I've tried to do is to show that I understand racism and I understand how it feels to suffer racism, and I can express that. But that's not the only experience I've had in life.
It's not the entirety of your existence.
Exactly.
You're a person with multitudes,
Exactly.
Definitely.
And I think, and that's the idea of, to me, and this is again what I really love about poetry, is it allows you to express in so many different ways, in so many different aspects of our multifaceted characters that we all are as human beings.
Why do you think it is poetry that lends itself so well? Like,
do you know, I think why, to me, I'm thinking about it, is that the words are important and you can see them on a page, but the performance also brings the emotion to it. So, like a painting, I can see what the artist wanted to portray on that painting, but I can't feel the emotion of the artist directly. It's through the painting. Now, when I'm performing a poem, now the words will convey the emotion, but the tone as well.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's with poetry, you get that sort of dual aspect. It's not just the choice of words, it's how they're delivered. As we've always said, words in context, you'll understand them more. Someone said to me a while back, a certain word I used was negative, and I said, no, it's not. It's a word. It has no positive or negative to it.
Like, in a way, words are neutral. It's just our experience that shapes them.
What we bring to it in the subjective as subjects then gives it context. Now, that may be a negative context or a positive context. And again, it's also the recipients of them words, how they interpret them. So I might say something that I think I'm saying something positive, but someone might take that negatively. So again, that's another aspect that you have to consider, that there's an audience listening and their interpretation.
I think to go back to you saying as well about the speaking, like your intonation and your tone and your rhythm, and like that's something I really value as well as a poet. And I think you saying about listening to rap and listening to Gil Scott Heron, this is just a conversation I've had like the second time today, but I do think anyone who writes poetry should be listening to rap, hip-hop, grime, because there's so much to be learned from rhyme structures and wordplay and rhythm that you won't learn if you just study classical poetry in school. It won't drill in.
Well, I always say it, I've got a poem, you know the poem, called Fuck Off.
Yeah.
Right.
I enjoy this poem.
And I introduce it, but what I've started to say is this is about the use of words, but it's not the words we choose to use, but the context by which we use them. And so the poem can say so many profanities all the way through it. However, it never offends anyone. You know, and I'm talking about how we use language, and a different inflection will give a different context to the words. And so that's what that poem's about. Sure. But I think I used the title and that specific phrase just because it's so universal. I think it was the Billy Connolly joke that if you're in an airport in Kathmandu and a Buddhist monk tries to take your luggage off you and you tell him to fuck off, you'll know exactly what you mean. There's no language barrier between it. You know, it's one word that goes universal.
The universally understood word. Yeah.
So, and again, that was the perfect sort of, what's the word, hook her onto, to then sort of to explore how we use words. Yeah. And again, I think it's one of my classics now. It's me, I've got classics.
You've got a repertoire, you've got most requested.
Yeah, it is one of them ones. And there's a lovely thing I do with that now. I introduce it with, it's a poem with 24 fuck-offs in it, so it's 3 minutes, so it's going to be 8 fuck-offs a minute. So if anyone's going to be offended by me using it, can I politely ask them to... And then someone always shouts, fuck off. And I say, no, forgive me. You know, and again, straight away, you've got the audience to engage with you. Yeah. They want to listen to you, you know. And I think, because that was my biggest fear, is if I stand up and do this poem, does anyone want to hear it? You know, and I've realised that you've already got an audience who've come to listen to poetry, so they want to hear it.
Again, I feel like it's going back to permission. Gerry, it's been a complete pleasure to have you on.
And I've loved it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, it's been a real pleasure for me.
You're welcome back anytime. Tell everyone where they can find you.
Brilliant. Facebook, Gorilla Lips, spelled GUERRILLA, and also YouTube with the same title, and you'll find me. If not, Gerry Clarkson. Do a search on that, and it will link you to my poetry pages.
Instagram as well.
Oh yeah, Instagram. Is it at or hashtag?
It's at.
I'm such a Luddite.
You'll find them.
Gorilla.lips.
Make sure you do go give Gerry a follow, keep up to date, find out all about his playwriting when it's ready to share about those things. Thank you so much for tuning in, everyone. We'll see you next week. That concludes today's episode. Be sure to rate and review the podcast, like and subscribe on YouTube, and give us a follow on social media as well. We're a small platform just starting out, so any support you can give goes a long way. Be sure to check out our sponsor over at maria-and-craigs.com and use the code SALT15 for 15% off. And be sure to check out Gerry and I's social media as well. Thank you for all the support and all the love, and I'll see you next time.